Welcome to the session on media under siege in India, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. I think, where the media in Pakistan is concerned, we keep talking about the pressures that we face, which seem to be increasing with every passing year. But sometimes it's also important to remember that this is something not isolated to Pakistan. Within the region, a lot of our colleagues face similar pressures. And if we look worldwide also at the moment, the media does face a number of challenges in places that we perhaps earlier did not expect it to, whether you talk about the West with its better democratic values. South Asia in itself has, of course, had a mixed record. We've also had a very lively media, unlike a lot of other countries where the democracy or the age of the nation state is still relatively young. But these have been difficult times, and I think the illustrious panel that I have here today, which has kindly agreed to join us, give us time, has a great experience and will be able to throw light on it. I will begin by inviting Hamid Mir Sahab. He needs no introduction. He has been, what shall I say, a permanent face on television since the channels were introduced to Pakistan. He has been banned twice, shot, and I think the rest I'll leave up to him.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. First of all, I must pay tribute to Asma Jahangir because all of us are here due to her struggle and her commitment for the human rights. और जो हमारा जो आज का subject है, first of all, I must tell you that when I came on the stage, so the local media, they asked me that this is an international conference and most of the speakers are speaking in English language, but there are some requirements for, so please हमारा भी ख्याल रखें, थोड़ा सा उर्दू में भी बोल लें. So before I start, I must say sorry to our honorable guest, Mr. Steve Butler, who is sitting on the stage. Mr. Steve Butler was blacklisted in 2019 just because he wrote an article in Washington Post and he criticized the anti-media policies of the then government, and he was put on the stop list. So in the first Asma Jahangir conference, he was invited, he came here, and then again he was invited and he was stopped and he was deported from Pakistan. From the Lahore airport, he was deported. So at that time, Mr. Imran Khan was the Prime Minister. And this time he was invited again, and most of you are aware that again he was detained on the Lahore airport. He spent 8 hours there. Finally, when there was some intervention, so he was allowed to enter in Pakistan, and now he is sitting here. But he faced a lot of pain and problem, so that's why we say sorry to him. But at least there is a difference, and Mr. Butler will agree that last time when he was deported, nobody was able to help him. This time they tried to deport him, but he was able to send his message to some of his friends, and they intervened, and finally he was allowed. And yesterday, I am told the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, sent a message of sorry to Mr. Steve Butler through Law Minister Mr. Azam Nazir Tarar. Last year when I spoke in this conference, I was banned. And I was banned for 9 months. This year, when I am talking to you, I am not banned. It's not because the government is changed. Because the situation is the same. Most of the people who are present here, they may think that I am not banned because the government is changed. This is not the case. Last year I was banned. This year there are some other people who are banned. Last year when I was banned, some of my friends in media, they were justifying the ban, and they were abusing me, accusing me, they were declaring me traitor, and they were saying it's very good that Hamid Mir is banned in Pakistan because he is anti-Pakistan. No, those journalist colleagues who were supporting a ban on me last year, now they are banned. And I condemn a ban on Arshad Sharif, I condemn a ban on Imran Riaz, I condemn a ban on Sabir Shakir, I also condemn the fake cases of treason and sedition registered against all of them. Because last year, I was facing, Asma Shirazi was facing sedition cases. This year, they are facing. So the government is changed, but the media is still under pressure. The subject of this session is the media under siege in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So I can give you an example, a living example, and the example is sitting with you in this hall. And when I will mention his name, you will come to know that yes, you are right, media is under siege. That gentleman can come to this conference, he can address from this podium, but he cannot appear on any TV channel in Pakistan. And his name is Manzoor Pashtun, who is sitting here. So I am very thankful to the management of Asma Jagir conference, the organizers, that they have invited people to speak in this conference who cannot come on Pakistani media. और ये जो मैंने आपसे बात की है, ये दरअसल मैंने बात इसलिए की है कि वो हुक्मरान जो दावा करते हैं कि वो इमरान खान के दौर में मीडिया पर बड़ी पाबंदी थी, इमरान खान के दौर में पाकिस्तान जो है उसको बड़े मसाइल का सामना था, अब तो मीडिया आज़ाद हो गया है, तो बताएं कि मंजूर पश्तीन जो है वो मेरे प्रोग्राम में क्यों नहीं आ सकता? मैंने कई दफ़ा कहा कि मैं इसको बुलाना चाहता हूँ, नहीं बुलाते। इस तरह और भी कुछ लोग हैं. So when I was banned last year, the World Press Freedom Index declared Pakistan on 145th number. Pakistan 145वें नंबर पे था. Now I am not banned, but the position of Pakistan declined, and now Pakistan is on 157. During last 4 years, Pakistan जो है वो World Press Freedom Index पे 18 पॉइंट नीचे आया है. आप देखें कितना नीचे आया पाकिस्तान, 18 पॉइंट नीचे आया. पाकिस्तान lost 18 points on World Press Freedom Index in last 4 years. And in last 4 years, 24 Pakistani journalists, including 2 female journalists, they were assassinated in the line of their duty. और किसी एक भी सहाफ़ी का कातिल नहीं पकड़ा गया, ख्वाह वो पंजाब में था या सिंध में था या बलूचिस्तान में था या खैबर पख्तूनख्वा में था या किसी और जगह पे था. और आप देखें कि पिछले साल मैं इमरान खान की हुकूमत पे तनकीद कर रहा था और आज मैं शहबाज शरीफ साहब की हुकूमत जो है उसका शुक्रिया तो अदा कर दिया कि आपने स्टीवन बटलर को सॉरी कह दिया, लेकिन ये तो बताएं ना कि मंजूर पश्तीन क्यों नहीं टीवी चैनल पे आ सकता. और आप जब वो सहाफ़ी जिन पर आपकी हुकूमत के दौर में बगावत के मुकदमे दर्ज हुए और उन पर पाबंदी लगाई गई और साबिर शाकिर और अरशद शरीफ को पाकिस्तान छोड़ने पर मजबूर कर दिया गया, तो वो क्यों पाकिस्तान छोड़ने पे मजबूर हुए? इसका कोई जवाब क्यों नहीं देता? मरियम औरंगज़ेब साहबा जो हमारी इंफॉर्मेशन मिनिस्टर हैं, वो कहती हैं इमरान रियाज तो जर्नलिस्ट ही नहीं है. आपको सबको पता है कि इमरान रियाज जो है वो मेरा कितना दुश्मन है, मुझ पर कितनी तनकीद करता है, लेकिन मैं ये नहीं कहूँगा कि मरियम औरंगज़ेब उसको अगर कह रही हैं कि वो जर्नलिस्ट नहीं है तो वो सही कह रही हैं. ये बात बिल्कुल गलत है, क्योंकि जर्नलिस्ट जो है उसका कोई भी व्यू हो सकता है. लेकिन चलें, आप कहती हैं वो पॉलिटिकल वर्कर है, तो पॉलिटिकल वर्कर पर भी पाबंदी लगाना ये कहाँ की जमहूरियत है, ये कहाँ की आज़ादी सहाफ़त है? तो लिहाजा इस वक्त पाकिस्तान में सिर्फ हुकूमत तब्दील हुई है, हालात तब्दील नहीं हुए. पाकिस्तान का मीडिया इमरान खान के दौर में भी गैर एलानिया सेंसरशिप का शिकार था. पाकिस्तान का मीडिया शहबाज शरीफ के दौर में भी गैर एलानिया सेंसरशिप का शिकार है, और इस पर आप सबको आवाज़ बुलंद करनी चाहिए. क्योंकि मैं बार बार कह रहा हूं सिर्फ हुकूमत तब्दील हुई है, मीडिया के हालात तब्दील नहीं हुए, ये पार्लियामेंट के हालात भी तब्दील नहीं हुए। ये देखें, ये कामरान मुर्तज़ा साहब, ये सेनेट के मेंबर हैं, ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट बार एसोसिएशन के साबिक सदर हैं। इन्होंने और आज़म नज़ीर तारड़ साहब ने मिलकर एक कोशिश की और पार्लियामेंट की जो कमेटी है फॉर इन्फोर्स डिस्पीरियंसेस, जो लापता अफराद पे कमेटी है, उसके मुज़ाकरात करवाए, जो इन्होंने कोयटा में धरना दिया हुआ था, और वो धरना ख़त्म कराया। और उन बेचारों ने सिर्फ इनको 50 लोगों की एक लिस्ट दी कि इन लोगों को आप रहा भी ना करें, इनको अदालत में भी पेश ना करें, बस सिर्फ ये वादा कर लें कि इनको आपने फेक एनकाउंटर में मारना नहीं है। तो इन्होंने वो लिस्ट उनसे ली और उन मजलूम लोगों ने अपना धरना कोयटा में ख़त्म कर दिया। उसके बाद आप जानते हैं क्या हुआ? इनके मुंह पे जोर का थप्पड़ पड़ा है। ये सारे जो वजीर है ना हमारे इस हुकूमत के, उस लिस्ट में जो एक मासूम सा शायर था, एक पोएट, अब पोएट, उसको निकाल कर मार के उसकी लाश फेंक दी। ये उन्होंने, वो कहते हैं जी हमने दहशतगर्द मारा। आपने दहशतगर्द नहीं मारा, आपने आज़म नज़ीर तारड़ और राना सनाउल्लाह और इन सब लोग जो पार्लियामानी कमेटी में, इनके मुंह पे आपने जोर का थप्पड़ मारा है। और आपको शर्म आनी चाहिए ये थप्पड़ मार के कि आप कहते हैं ये जो शायर था ये दहशतगर्द था। दहशतगर्द वो है जो पाकिस्तान का आइन तोड़ता है। चले मान लिया कि वो दहशतगर्द था, तो फिर आप में और दहशतगर्द में फर्क क्या है? दहशतगर्द भी पाकिस्तान का कानून तोड़ता है, आप भी पाकिस्तान का कानून तोड़ते हैं। ये बात हम पाकिस्तान के मीडिया पे नहीं कह सकते। जब ये बात मंजूर पश्तीन कहता है तो कहते हैं ये भी दहशतगर्द है। तो अगर ये दहशतगर्द है तो फिर आप और मैं, हम सारे ही दहशतगर्द हैं। देखें फर्क क्या है कि एक तरफ हमारी हुकूमत जो है उसकी जो तर्जुमान है इंफॉर्मेशन मिनिस्टर साहिबा, वो उन सहाफ़ियों को सहाफ़ी मानने के लिए तैयार नहीं है जिन पर आजकल पाबंदी है। तो दूसरी तरफ जो इमरान खान साहब हैं वो कहते हैं वो सलीम साफ़ी जो है वो सलीम साफ़ी नहीं, वो सलीम लफाफी है। और गरीदा फारूकी साहिबा, उनके बारे में कितनी काबिल एतराज़ ज़ुबान इस्तेमाल की। दोनों में कोई फ़र्क नहीं है। ये जो इस वक्त हुक्मरान इत्तेहाद है, आप देखें ये भी वही काम कर रहे हैं जो पहले इमरान खान कर रहा था। तो इसलिए आसमा जागीर कॉन्फ्रेंस जो है, इसके प्लेटफॉर्म से हम ये मुतालबा करते हैं कि वो पॉलिसियाँ जिनकी वजह से पाकिस्तान का मीडिया जो है वो वर्ल्ड प्रेस फ्रीडम इंडेक्स पे मुसलसल नीचे आ रहा था, आप उन पॉलिसियों को ख़त्म करें। ये मुतालबा हम इसलिए कर रहे हैं कि आप इन पॉलिसियों को आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं और आपको इसमें कोई ना नदामत है ना शर्म है, बल्कि आप कहते हैं कि हमारे मुल्क में तो पाकिस्तान का मीडिया आज़ाद हो गया है, इमरान खान के दौर में मीडिया आज़ाद नहीं था। एक और बात मैं आपको कहना चाहता हूँ कि ये जो सलीम साफ़ी और गरीदा फारूकी के बारे में बात की जाती है या और जो हमारे साफ़ी हैं उनके बारे में बात की जाती है ना, तो ये सिर्फ गैर रियासती अनासर बात नहीं करते। एक सोची समझी साजिश के तहत फेक न्यूज़ को पाकिस्तान के मीडिया की आज़ादी छीनने के लिए एक वेपन के तौर पे इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है। सम स्टेट इंस्टीट्यूशंस आर यूजिंग फेक न्यूज़ टू सबवर्ट द मीडिया फ्रीडम इन पाकिस्तान। दे आर स्प्रेडिंग डिसइंफॉर्मेशन अगेंस्ट डिफरेंट जर्नलिस्ट्स एंड मीडिया ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस। जिस तरह इमरान खान साहब कहते हैं ना कि वो फलां बंदा जो है वो पैसे लेके फलां टीवी चैनल ने मेरे खिलाफ साजिश की, इसी तरह कुछ रियासती इदारों के लोग जो हैं वो भी यही बात करते हैं। वो कहते हैं जी आप सारे टैक्स चोर हैं, तो अगर हम सारे टैक्स चोर हैं तो टैक्स चोरी में हमें अंदर कर दो भाई, क्यों नहीं करते आप अंदर? तो इसलिए मैं ये कहना चाहूँगा कि अगर कोई ये समझता है कि पाकिस्तान के हालात बेहतर हो रहे हैं, वो एमको की जन्नत में रहता है। बल्कि मैं आज आपको एक और बात कहना चाहता हूँ, बड़ी ज़िम्मेदारी के साथ बात कर रहा हूँ कि अगर कोई ये समझता है कि पाकिस्तान के हालात जो हैं वो बेहतरी की तरफ जा रहे हैं और अब दुनिया जो है उसके हालात भी बदल गए हैं और अब तो पाकिस्तान में मार्शल लॉ नहीं लग सकता। भाई अभी 24 घंटे पहले मैंने एक जगह पे मार्शल लॉ की बात बार बार सुनी है, सिर्फ 24 घंटे पहले। और अगर मैं समझता हूँ कि अगर आपने पाकिस्तान में दोबारा ऐसे हालात पैदा किए सियासी जमातों ने या किसी और ने और मार्शल लॉ लग गया तो इससे पाकिस्तान को नुकसान होगा। मार्शल लॉ ने हमेशा पाकिस्तान को नुकसान पहुँचाया है। पाकिस्तान जब टूटा तो मार्शल लॉ था। आप कहते हैं कि जो ईस्ट पाकिस्तान में आपकी डिफीट थी, मिलिट्री डिफीट नहीं थी, पॉलिटिकल डिफीट थी। चले मान लेते हैं पॉलिटिकल डिफीट थी। पॉलिटिकल डिफीट इसलिए थी कि शेख मुजीबुर रहमान के खिलाफ पाकिस्तान आर्मी का एक फौजी जनरल गुलाम उमर जो है, उसने एक सेल बनाया हुआ था और वो शेख मुजीबुर रहमान के सियासी मुखालफिन में पैसे बांटता था। जैसे बाद में 88 में भी IGI बनाई गई और पैसे बांटे गए और उसके बाद भी पैसे बांटे गए, तो 1970 के इलेक्शन में ये काम शुरू हुआ, पॉलिटिकल इंटरवेंशन, और अभी तक ये सिलसिला चल रहा है। तो शुक्र है कि 1970 में पाकिस्तान का मीडिया आज़ाद नहीं था, वरना आज आपने कहना था कि वो पाकिस्तान जो है वो इंडिया ने नहीं तोड़ा था, वो पाकिस्तान के मीडिया ने तोड़ दिया था, आपने ये कहना था। और आखिर में मैं ये कहूँगा कि इस वक्त पाकिस्तान में कुछ ड्रैकोनियन लॉ हैं। अनफॉर्चुनेटली these draconian laws were not imposed on us by any military dictator. These draconian laws were imposed on us by democratic governments. जैसा कि 2016 में जो मुस्लिम लीग नून की हुकूमत थी, उसने पीका का कानून हम पे इम्पोज किया और वो पीका का कानून आज उन पे इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है। इसी तरह ये जो पिछली इमरान खान की हुकूमत थी, इसने पीका ऑर्डिनेंस जारी किया और आज जब FIA किसी सहाफ़ी को और सियासतदान को गिरफ्तार करती है तो उस पर वही पीका कानून की सेक्शन 20 लगाती है। तो ये सारे कानून जो है ये ख़त्म होनी चाहिए, इनके खिलाफ यहाँ पे एक करारदाद मंजूर होनी चाहिए और उस करारदाद में ये मुतालबा किया जाना चाहिए कि जो पाकिस्तान की इलेक्टेड पार्लियामेंट है, ये पार्लियामेंट पाकिस्तान के आइन और कानून के तहफ़्फ़ुज़ के लिए कोई किरदार अदा करे, सिर्फ नौकरी ना करे, हाथ बांध के खड़ी है और जी सर किए जा रही है। और जुडिशरी भी जो है उसको भी खड़ा होने की ज़रूरत है। इतनी डिवाइडेड जुडिशरी पाकिस्तान की हिस्ट्री में हमने कभी नहीं देखी। तो जब पार्लियामेंट मजबूत नहीं होगी, जुडिशरी डिवाइडेड होगी, तो मीडिया की फ्रीडम को तहफ़्फ़ुज़ कहाँ से मिलेगा। तो उस तहफ़्फ़ुज़ के लिए आप सबको, हम सबको मिल के इकट्ठे एक जदोजहद करनी है। और इस बात पे ख़त्म करूँगा हबीब जालिब के शेर पे कि झूठे मुकद्दमात हैं, फर्जी शहादतें, हम फिर भी लिख रहे हैं जनू की हकायतें।
Thank you, Mir Sahab, for a very rousing speech. Stephen Butler, you have quite the hard act to follow. He already is known to all of us thanks to the fact that he was banned from the country last year. That's the surefire way of getting fame in Pakistan. But he made it this year. He is now the, journalist and a senior program consultant committee to protect journalists.
Thank you, Arifa, and thank you, Hamid, for that. Those very nice words. I want to thank the staff of the Asma Jahangar Foundation for the incredible work that they did to make it possible for me to come here. And I'd also like to thank the government of Pakistan for opening the door. I should say a few words about what happened last Thursday when I arrived, because there has been some misreporting about what happened, and I'd like to set the record straight. I believe what happened was a lack of communication inside the Pakistani government. I was given a visa and a welcome from the Interior Ministry, but the FIA, which controls the immigration, did not get word that I was to be allowed into the country, and so they stopped. And they stopped because they were not allowed to let me enter as long as my name appeared on their computer. But I have to say, I was there for those 8 hours, and they were rather kind to me. I was not interrogated, I was not abused in any way. I was offered food and water and a place to sleep until it was possible for them to get clear instructions about what to do. So I think they were highly professional. Whatever mistake was made, it was not by the people who stopped me. I truly regret what happened in 2019 when I was immediately turned back. And why is that? Of course, it was very inconvenient. But it ended a period of long, open communication between my organization, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and the government of Pakistan. We have for years sent delegations of senior journalists and senior board members to meet with Pakistan's prime ministers and senior officials of all kind, and we tell them what we think. And they listen to us and they tell us what they think. And that was a very healthy process that was unfortunately brought to an end. The Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, I think globally, we form a network that supports press freedom everywhere. That's our goal, and I think it's an important aspect of the international media scene. It's true that I and my colleagues have said highly critical things about the way that Pakistan treats its journalists. But Pakistan is not unique in that in any way. Take a look at what we say about Iran, about India, about China. You'll find we speak very openly and very critically. But I can say unequivocally, we are not against Pakistan in any way. We are not anti-Pakistan. Neither were we for or against the government of Imran Khan. We are neither for nor against the government of Shehbaz Sharif. We are not against the army. We are not against the intelligence services. We are certainly not against the judiciary. What we are for is the journalists. Our work, we try to promote it so that journalists can work without interference and without fear of retaliation for what they do. But aside from this, we also see what happened to me in 2019 when I was turned back as part of a sign of the times. At roughly the same time, a few months earlier, two colleagues of mine who were visiting Tanzania were detained and interrogated, and their equipment was seized. These are the first two incidents, I think, in the history of CPJ where our representatives have been treated in this sort of hostile manner by authorities. And what we are witnessing is, frankly, we see this as part of a worldwide decline of press freedom that very much includes the United States. I was looking over some statistics. In 2020, in the United States, there are documented 630 assaults of journalists. 630 assaults of journalists in a country where press freedom is considered an absolutely fundamental value. Those assaults were associated with the election campaign and also the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. But still, it's a shocking number. Those numbers of assaults went down last year, but still remained at a rather high level. This year in Mexico, 13 journalists have been killed so far, and there is not even a war there. In Ukraine, 15 journalists have died. In Haiti, 5 journalists have been killed. And the Philippines, 4 journalists have been killed so far this year. If you look at the imprisoned counts, in Iran, just in the past 6 weeks, 41 journalists have been put in jail. 41 journalists. In Myanmar this year is likely to be the #1 jailer of journalists, 51. China, it will be right up there, although a few journalists we've been able to document who are associated with the Uyghur journalist and scholar Ilan Tohti have been released. We've been able to get in touch with them. There are a large number of journalists in jail in Vietnam, Turkey, and Egypt. In Afghanistan, the media industry has, I won't say it's completely collapsed, but it's under tremendous pressure, and it's just a faint shadow of what it was before August 15th. And in India, next door, the press is under tremendous pressure. I mean, just look what is happening in Kashmir. It's shameful that these journalists, they go to jail there, the courts ordered bail, and yet they are rearrested on different charges, and so they never get out. So I'm going to surprise many of you by saying that despite all of the difficulties that our friend Hamid just described, which are very, very real, in some ways I feel that Pakistan is a bright spot in this region. Why? Because you look at the journalists, you look at the quality of the journalists, you look at the determination, you look at the bravery, you look at the talent, and there is very much to build on. So this is my hope that Pakistan can use this foundation of high quality journalism and the tradition to rebuild much of what has come under pressure in the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Just one short announcement before I invite the next speaker. ARY had also been invited to speak at the panel today. They had also kindly accepted, but because of some sports-related issues, I think there's some cricket match going on, so they got rather busy with that and they couldn't make it, but they were invited, especially because, sorry, my knowledge of cricket is abysmal, but I do know that there was something to do with cricket, and that's why, despite the fact that they had accepted the invitation, because they are under fire these days, but they couldn't make it. I will now break the order of speakers a little bit. I think after two male speakers, it's important to now have a woman talk about it. So I'd like to invite Malini Subramaniam. She's an independent journalist and the former head International Committee of the Red Cross. She has reported extensively on human rights violations in India. So hopefully, apart from talking about the press and the siege it is under in India, she will also talk about reporting in conflict zones.
Thank you. See, right at the outset, I wish to express my deep gratitude for being invited to this conference, primarily also because a lot of Indians love to come to Pakistan, and I'm really, really grateful, and I was amazed at the warmth that I came across here from people in the conference, from people on the streets, and they immediately reached out to us saying that, oh, you're from India and most welcome. So thank you so much, and I hope more and more Indians come and more Pakistanis go to India. And I think it's important that we do this exchange of people rather than get caught in cricket politics and politicians themselves who really make it difficult for people's transit and friendship. Of course, Asma Jahangir is somebody whom we have always looked up to. We in India, she's a household name amongst the human rights activists. I've not met her, but I've always followed her work. And it's so privileged, I feel, to be engulfed in the warmth that she has left behind her work and the continuum that continues to happen now with her family, with her friends, and with all her well-wishers, not just in Pakistan, and I think all over the globe. So I'm extremely happy to be here again in this particular conference. Thank you so much for inviting me. To be in Pakistan is definitely it's a great experience, because in India, what we get to see that if you are talking anything against the government policies and they said, "Acha, to ye baat hai, go to Pakistan." So here I am in Pakistan. I must say that I did not face too much difficulties coming over, and it was rather smooth, unlike my colleague Stephen, who had to go through some kind of a trouble time. But Lahore especially, I must bring in a little bit of personal context that I'm married into a Punjabi family, and my in-laws hail from Pakistan, and before the partition they moved to India, and they really hold very pleasant memories. My father-in-law's families come from Quetta, and my mother-in-law's family come from Sargodha. And I was very keen to visit Sargodha, to a village called Farooqi, where she narrated. She's 83-year-old, and I met her, and she said that in Farooqi, when she came about a couple of months before the partition, sometime in January 1947 for a wedding, and she said the entire village was there and there was a lot of happiness. There was no clue that there's going to be a partition. बिल्कुल एहसास नहीं था कि कोई partition होने वाला है. Or finally when they had to leave, she of course came in much earlier, but her other family members, when they came, there was a sarpanch, a Muslim sarpanch in Farooqi village, who ensured that everybody moved out of their village safely. Unfortunately, there were a few killings. She said about 6 of her cousins, male cousins, got killed, and the sarpanch was so devastated, and he said that mere safed chadar no daag lag gaye. So he was very saddened to, but all the same, I wanted to visit Farooqi and see if his family is still there, and probably even tell them that, they have people in India who hold pleasant memories about the village, and also to be able to write about it, primarily because of the kind of hatred that is being right now spewed amongst the minority community in India. And what I'm going to now come back to the topic that I'm going to discuss, you will see that it will resonate what I'm actually talking about. Now, as I stand before this very distinguished guest, I must say that, we're going to talk about media siege, but I'll give you a few examples of some of the journalists. So as I stand here, Siddiqui Kappan, a 43-year-old journalist from Kerala, is spending his 749th day in prison. And mind you, this despite the fact that he's got a bail from the Supreme Court. So 2 years back, he goes to a village in Hathras in order to cover the case of a 19-year-old Dalit girl who was gang raped and murdered with, of course, in complicity with the police and the state government. So when he goes to cover this news along with some of his friends, he's immediately arrested, and he's been saying that he's been charged with sedition, with outraging religious feelings, he's a Muslim, raising funds, and conspiring to commit terrorist activity. This is a journalist who went to cover a news of atrocity against a Dalit girl. Now, why does Kappan continue to remain in jail? Because of some subsequent charges against him, of him being a member of the Popular Front of India. Now, Popular Front of India is an organization which primarily works for the Muslim community in India. And very recently, in September 2022, this is last month, the Home Minister has banned this organization. Now, Siddiqui Kappan is going to be very difficult for him to come out, because now they have charged that he was raising funds and PFI was actually giving him funds to cover this news in order to create a lot of trouble for the country. So the enforcement director, which is now a very convenient arm for our government to slap a lot of cases of money laundering. Now this, and also to fix opposition and opponents, political opponents and dissenters, it has alleged that PFI has funded Siddiqui Kappan's visit to the village in order to disturb communal harmony, instigating riots and speeding terror. Yeah? So this is Siddiqui Kappan, who now continues to be in jail despite the Supreme Court order for bail. Look at the case of Rana Ayub. She's a fiery journalist, and she's been going hammer and tong against the BJP, and she's made no bush about it. And she was charge-sheeted very recently by the enforcement director under, once again, the infamous Prevention of Money Laundering Act, for having raised and collected 2.70 crores for helping people during the pandemic, but not utilizing the funds fully for the purpose. They have made charges that she's put some money into her personal account, she's transferred the money to her father's account, everything of which she's denied, but she will have to sort of prove herself out of it. She's not arrested. But Ayub's, the resentment of the BJP government against Rana Ayub goes back in 2011, because she has been doing a lot of investigative work in the Gujarat riots of 2002, where she said that the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Home Minister Mr. Amit Shah, they are actually involved in the killings of over 1,000 Muslims in the Gujarat 2002 riots. Her book by the name of Gujarat Files is already out, and they are extremely upset about it. Yeah? Now, look at what some of our ministers, not the current one, the earlier Minister for Information and Broadcasting says. So these are journalists who have been writing, who have been investigating with evidence, with fact-checking, and giving news. So what does he say? Freedom of press is very important today, but any freedom comes with responsibility. So there has to be responsible freedom and no sensationalization by the press. News should not be deliberately defaming anyone. Yeah? So they will decide who is being defamed. So like in most countries, India too has adhered to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 19.1. It ensures the fundamental rights and right to freedom of speech and expression. However, there is a subclause, 19.2, which imposes reasonable restrictions. So what it does, it allows the government to frame laws to impose reasonable restrictions in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the states, friendly relations with foreign state, public order, decency and morality, and contempt of court, defamation and incitement to an offense. So all these exceptions are there, and they find it very convenient to book people exactly in these sections and tell the journalists are using freedom of press for other things. Now, talking about decency and morality, it brings us to another case of Mohammed Zubair. Now, he gave an old tweet of, in 2018, where he says that before 2014, mark the year, before 2014, Honeymoon Hotel became Hanuman Hotel after 2014. Now, this was an old tweet from an old film that he tweeted from a film called Kisi Se Na Kehna, but he was again charged for hurting religious sentiments. Yeah? Now, Zubair, who is Mohammed Zubair? Zubair, along with Prateek Sinha, another person, journalist, he set up a fact-finding website. It's called the Alt News in 2017, and has been methodically debunking the severe propaganda that BJP's IT cell, they have been putting up fake news, they have been putting up news about, various personalities, including the opponents, in order to defame people. And Alt News has been also very, very clearly monitoring hate speeches. So they looked at an opportunity when somebody can complain about it, and immediately he was put in jail. So now after, Zubair also tweeted about the comments made by the BJP spokesperson insulting Prophet Muhammad during a television debate. And that got really widely covered because he has 100,000 followers. Now, his tweet got so widely shared that several Muslim countries, including the UAE, the Saudi Arabia, the Qatar, and Iran, really made it difficult for the BJP government, and they had to actually suspend the BJP spokesperson. Although initially they said that these are fringe elements, but they were forced to suspend her. Now what happens, people like Zubair and other people, once you're in prison, there are several cases against you, and he was put several cases against him from different cities, and from Delhi, from Uttar Pradesh. So you come out of one case, there's another case filed against you, so you have to fight against the other case. Now, thankfully, a bail was applied for in the Supreme Court, and finally the Supreme Court put all the cases together, asked the Delhi court to look into it, and so that he can walk free. Now, thankfully, the Supreme Court, when the UP government said that there should be a clause in Zubair's bail that he should be refrained from tweeting. And thankfully, the Supreme Court came back to say that it's like asking a lawyer not to argue, a person not to speak. Whatever he does, he will be responsible in law, but we can't ask a journalist to rise. So thanks for that. The Supreme Court came out with that. Now, you would wonder, because of the first few names that I gave were of Muslim journalists, is that so? Is a question that should come into everybody's mind. But no, I had several other examples. Teesta Setalwat, for example, she also moved against became a co-petitioner for one of the Gujarat riots, and as soon as 16 years, she followed a case, and the case was turned against her, and she was put in prison. Today, Zubair is out on bail. Today, Teesta Setalwat also out on bail. I have been reporting from the conflict zones of Butler. Probably people, I do not know, maybe not know where Butler exactly is. Butler is a region in the state of Chhattisgarh, which is in central India, and it has been having the presence of CPI Maoists, which is a banned party, and the government has been really under the pretext of wiping out the Maoists or putting an end to the Maoist struggle, they have been actually not successful, but instead, in order to show that they are successful or they are able to continue to do their work, they are pulling up innocent villagers, arresting them, there are extrajudicial killings. In fact, what was spoken about in Balochistan yesterday, the session, it resonated a lot with me about what's happening in Butler. The Adivasis in Butler are asking for teachers and educationists and health professionals, but what you're getting is forge. There are a lot of checkposts, and primarily because the checkposts are important so that the extractive industries can come, because that's a region which is rich in mineral resources. Yeah. I'm going to stop here because there is a very little time, and India is a huge country and I can go on and on about it. I want to only say that, end up by saying that whether it is a central government which wants to apparently declare India to be a Hindu Rashtra, or whether the state governments within the region, even if whichever the party is, they wish to extract the minerals, they will use these enemies, they will create the enemies like the Naxalites or the Muslims, they will create a huge hype around them and actually not allow journalists to do their work and not allow the civil society to function. And this is exactly the use in order to repress the civil society and the journalists. And it's important that the entire fraternity needs to come together in order to challenge this, because there is a much bigger ulterior motive of the government to go ahead with this process of putting the media under complete siege. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now invite Mr. Daniel Bastard he's the Asia Pacific Director, Reporters Without Borders, and he's going to talk about the Press Freedom Index. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to express my deepest gratitude to the people behind the Asma Jahangir conference. I'm really impressed by the quality of the sessions of the debate here. I think it's a very precious moment and a precious conference. I'm going to try to talk about the three countries we're dealing with today, which are Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. And for that, I'm going to use the World Press Freedom Index. So it's basically this map. As you can see, the world has turned very red, and red means bad. More concretely, if we look at Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka, India and Sri Lanka is light red, and Pakistan is dark red, which means bad or very bad situation. Very concretely, out of 180 countries, Sri Lanka is ranked 146, India 150, and Pakistan is in position 157. If we look at Bangladesh, it's just behind at 162. So we see that these 3 or 4 countries are really tightly bunched in the last third of the ranking. And if we look into details behind these numbers, it's interesting to see on which points the situation is really bad or a little better. In order to come up with this ranking we do at Reporters Without Borders, we have developed 5 indicators about the way media and press freedom can thrive and flourish or can regress. So these 5 indicators are first the political influence over the media, the economic conditions in which the news are produced, then legislative framework, social and sociological factors, and last but not least, the security and safety of journalists. And when we look at this very last indicator, the security of journalists, this is the most weighty indicator in the score of India and Pakistan. Last year, 3 journalists were killed because of their job of reporting news. In Pakistan and India, the number is 4 journalists killed in 2021. So this is really preoccupying. This is the very harshest violence against journalists. Sri Lanka hasn't seen any dead journalists for a few years now, but it was really, really bad 15 years ago. And the physical attacks against journalists in Sri Lanka are very, very worrying as well. The second most preoccupying issue with press freedom in these three countries has to deal with political interference with media freedom. That's especially true in Pakistan with these repeated meddlings and crackdowns by the military establishment, the almighty military establishments against the media. That's really a serious concern, a long-term concern in Pakistan. These political problems are very much at stake in Sri Lanka as well, where the media are very polarized and often have to follow a line. And the trend is less visible in India, but it's still very strong. I think it's just less seen in data because in our figures because of the diversity of the country, which is greater in India than in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. This political interference has to be corroborated with a very high level of concentration, of media concentration in all these three countries. The economic conditions under which the media and the news is produced in these three countries is still very problematic. On one hand, there is often a very strong leverage between big media houses and political parties and political leaders, and that's a big problem. On the other hand, grassroots journalists who work on the ground, live often in a very deep financial insecurity, with very low wages, very poor working conditions, or sometimes with some wages that are just not paid for months. And that's something that is really, really critical in Pakistan, notably. And in the end, this situation of strong economic influence over the media is very badly impacting the independence of newsroom and, of course, the plurality of viewpoints inside media houses. When you have one media houses with is clearly associated with one political parties, they would have some very partial view on other political parties. And very concretely, for journalists, for editors, for chief editors, they know that they have to follow a line that is imposed in some way by their media owner and their political affiliates. And these journalists, these editors, these chief editors, they also know that there are implicit red lines that should not be crossed. More or less implicit red lines, that's where the trick is. But I'm talking about political red lines. People in Pakistan are well aware of these red lines, like you cannot talk about the military very freely, you have to be very cautious. But I'm talking here about social red lines as well. Some subjects are clearly taboo in South Asia and in these three countries we're talking about today. We can take, for instance, the fate of Tamil people in Sri Lanka, the fate of Kashmiri in India, or ethnic or religious minorities in Pakistan, Christians, Hindus, Ahmadiyas. And in the end, this leads to a misrepresentation of large parts of its country population, including minorities like Dalit or Adivasis in India, Muslim minorities in India and in Sri Lanka. But it also impacts the way gender minorities are reported in these countries. And this underrepresentation is also including not a minority, but a vast majority, which is the question of women's rights. Women-related issues are clearly underrepresented in South Asian media for two main reasons. First, women journalists still are much less represented in media houses, especially in executive positions, and also the subjects that are treated in the media are not really focused on women issue, except in some niche media that are really specialized in this issue. But in mainstream media, it's very it's not so common to find really in-depth inquiries and investigation about the way women live in these free countries. Finally, this picture I've just drawn is a bit pessimistic. There is one striking point in these three countries, and that is what we have remarked in our World Press Freedom Index, is the legislative framework. In our data, the legislative framework is the indicator where the two countries perform the best. In each country's constitution or law, there are legal guarantees for the free flow and information, and it's not so common. For myself, I've been a correspondent in China during 6 years, and I can say that there is no legal guarantee at all in theory and in practice. So this is, I mean, South Asia has really something encouraging with these legal guarantees. But of course, the problem is the implementation of these guarantees. This is where the problem really stands. And this calls for action by relevant institutions to make sure that these guarantees are properly enforced and that in the end the rule of law is effectively enforced. I think that's really the key and what we have to work on with the judiciary here, which has proved very voluntary, as what I've seen in the debates. And this is very urgent because in all three countries the score in the World Press Freedom Index has been deteriorating for several years. So there is a clear regression of media freedom, which means there is a clear emergency to tackle all these problems. And we all need to act now, inside the country, outside, through confrontation, debate, cooperation, and exchange of viewpoints, so that the media will remain the fourth pillar of democracy, and I think this is really urgent. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now be inviting our colleague from Sri Lanka. She's joining us virtually, Dilrukshi Handunnetti. She's an international award-winning investigative journalist and lawyer from Sri Lanka. She will obviously talk about the challenges of reporting from conflict zones, as well as the kind of political and economic crises that the country has been going through and the challenges that it has thrown up for the people who are reporting on it. So I welcome Dilrukshi.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. But I think after Daniel, there is very little to be said about Sri Lanka, perhaps. And he unpacked most of our countries in the region and why we are all looking very red. And as you all know, Sri Lanka does look very red, but I just listening to all four speakers, I felt that perhaps I should think about, explaining the situation in Sri Lanka, not only for reporters, not only for journalists who are covering the current crisis, but about the human rights situation in general as well. There was a popular uprising in April when Sri Lanka's escalating financial crisis spilled onto the streets of Colombo and then spread to elsewhere. which also was reflective of a very deep-rooted political crisis, a human rights crisis. Many crises were represented, but I would think that we were recognizing that Sri Lanka for long has been tolerating many things, and this includes probably the region's largest nepotism project. We all of you know that Sri Lanka was, we until recently, we had a massive family rule, and the protesters were able to get the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa to resign as a result of the protests. And then there was Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa who also stepped down, and the other Rajapakshas who were also holding office, different portfolios and in power in different forms, were all forced to step down from their duties at that time. But if you thought that Sri Lanka was going to rewrite history and to have a different story to tell, I think we can acknowledge the fact that we are not telling that different story. The Sri Lankan foreign minister was speaking, addressing the UN General Assembly just a few days ago, and he was speaking about freedom of expression and how important it is to have freedom of expression protected in Sri Lanka. We do know that we have leaders who speak about rights, who speak to the international community, and there is a separate lingo when you speak about the rights-based approach when you speak at such fora. But at the same time, on the same day, around the same time, 84 activists from Socialist Youth Forum were arrested. And to date, from the data I have, over 3,800 people have been arrested, all of them associated with the recent protests. And at least 1/3 of those people are still under detention. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what Sri Lanka is. And clearly, these arbitrary arrests, the harassment, continuous harassment of journalists, artists, activists associated with the protests and months-long protests is an ongoing thing for Sri Lanka. The global condemnation has not done much to change the situation here. The cracking down on dissent still continues, and there is a clear witch hunt of the protesters, and people actually live in fear. People are scared to speak freely, express themselves, or to speak, share even posts on social media, because there is a lot of surveillance which people would not even want to acknowledge publicly anymore for the fear of reprisal. The public's demand for regime change was something that a lot of journalists, a lot of social media activists, the YouTube community in Sri Lanka, they have done a tremendous job in highlighting the situation in Sri Lanka. It cannot be separated. At a point, the journalists were part of that struggle, and in Sri Lanka, journalists were representing that voice. As a result, they were also at the receiving end. But the failure to govern and to commit such economic crimes as done in Sri Lanka is something that journalists should be discussing, should be raising, and also instead of the witch hunt that we witnessed in Sri Lanka, it would have been probably ideal to have some kind of attempt to be made to recover the stolen assets, to ensure there is justice and fair pay. And I go back to something that Steve said about Sri Lanka, the fact that, and also Daniel, that there are no deaths, there are no killings of journalists, but it does not mean Sri Lanka is the perfect place, or it has never been really, because we've been one of the most violent places for journalists to live in and to work in. It changes for a while, but impunity has come to stay. And a case in point is that I would like to refer to the Permanent People's Tribunal. I just want to highlight this because it did deliver a very important verdict recently in The Hague about, and it held the Sri Lankan government responsible for what has happened. And I refer to the murder of my former editor, Lasantha Vikramatunga. And in this inquiry, there was something that I would like to mention, and the verdict did say that his right to life, freedom of expression, and effective remedy were all denied. And when you, it is not just about him, it's about all of us working in Sri Lanka, all journalists in Sri Lanka and not working in Sri Lanka, not just in South Asia, but the rest of the world as well. Impunity is something that we as a region got to tackle. And this was an emblematic case only, that where we learn that the state can actually get to the messenger and take your life for speaking the truth. And because we also talk about media under siege, I also want to mention something that I thought would be appropriate, because this is also South Asian space. We do not have the opportunity to report on each other. Our narratives are largely constructed by different different sections of the media. Sometimes it's deeply political. And listening to all of you, I felt the opportunity to report Pakistani journalists to visit India, or Indian journalists to visit Pakistan, and to understand and report on our people, on the issues that journalists or journalists face, would not be possible. So who prevents us from having that access? Who prevents us from telling these stories is also something I think we should discuss. And that's also because when we talk about media under siege, this is also one way of controlling free speech of stories that matter about our own understanding of our region as well. I think I wouldn't want to take a lot of time, simply because probably it's 2:08 in Colombo. Probably we can take some questions, and I think that you might want to ask questions about Sri Lanka rather than me offering a summary which is of my own.
Thank you. Thank you, Dilrukshi. Our last guest is Afzal Bhatt Sahab. He's the president of the PFUJ Pakistan, and he will now talk about some of the issues facing our journalists, especially in terms of their employment.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। सबसे पहले मैं आसमा जहांगीर फाउंडेशन को खराज तहसीन पेश करता हूं कि जिन्होंने आज के इस घुटन के दौर में भी इतनी शानदार कॉन्फ्रेंस का इनेकाद किया और लोगों को बोलने का मौका दिया। हाल में बैठे हुए सब लोग, क्योंकि पीएफजे की हिस्ट्री से वाकिफ़ हैं कि गुज़श्ता 70 साल से पीएफजे ने प्रेस फ्रीडम के लिए, शहरी आज़ादियों के लिए, जमहूरियत और जमहूरी इदारों के इस्तेहकाम के लिए एक तवील जद्दोजहद किया। उस पर बात नहीं करूँगा, क्योंकि आज का हमारा मौजू है कि आजकल हम किस किस्म की पाबंदियों का सामना कर रहे हैं। तो आज जब हम माजी के हालात को देखते हैं तो मुझे लगता है कि जो अनाउंस सेंसरशिप थी वो बहुत बेहतर थी आज की अनअनाउंस सेंसरशिप के मुकाबले में। आजकल अनअनाउंस सेंसरशिप के लिए जो हथियार इस्तेमाल किए जा रहे हैं उनका आप लोगों को इदराक ज़रूर होना चाहिए। 4-5 किस्म के वेपन आजकल जर्नलिस्टों के खिलाफ इस्तेमाल हो रहे हैं। पहला हथियार पुराना है लेकिन इस्तेमाल अब ज़्यादा हो रहा है कि जो जर्नलिस्ट बोलता है, लिखता है, बात करता है, उसके खिलाफ गैर अखलाकी मुहिम चला दी जाए, उस पर गैर अखलाकी इल्ज़ामात की बौछार कर दी जाए ताकि उसकी कम्युनिटी उसको डिफेंड ना कर सके, ताकि सिविल सोसाइटी उसके साथ खड़ी ना हो सके, उसके करीबी अजीज उसके साथ खड़े ना हो सके। जिसकी वाज़ेह मिसाल इन 2 महीनों के दौरान भी हुई। मुल्तान में हमारे बहुत अच्छे जर्नलिस्ट हैं, शकील अहमद, डॉन के ब्यूरो चीफ रहे, आजकल बेरोज़गार हैं। उनके खिलाफ और अखबार के चीफ रिपोर्टर के खिलाफ एक खातून के अगवा का मुकदमा दर्ज कर लिया गया। पहले हम सोचते रहे कि क्या बात करें इसके ऊपर, कि जब FIR शकील ने भेजी कि इस पर आप अपना रद्द-ए-अमल दें, तो इंसान सोचता है कि लोग क्या कहेंगे, FIR क्या है और ये मुतालबा क्या कर रहे हैं। बहरहाल जब बात की, मुल्तान के दोस्तों ने बहुत स्ट्रगल की और जिस चीफ रिपोर्टर को गिरफ्तार किया गया था उसको बेगुनाह करार देकर निकाला गया और पता चला कि ये FIR सिर्फ इनको बदनाम करने के लिए और इनको खामोश कराने के लिए दर्ज की गई थी। अभी कल का वाकया है, 3 दिन पहले गुजरांवाला के एक जर्नलिस्ट के खिलाफ कुमारबाजी का झूठा मुकदमा दर्ज कर लिया गया है। उसे पहले उठाया गया, रात भर थाना अहमदनगर में बंद रखा गया, तशद्दुद किया गया। जब जर्नलिस्टों को पता चला, उन्होंने सोशल मीडिया पे कैंपेन शुरू की, तो उसके खिलाफ सुबह सवेरे कुमारबाजी का मुकदमा दर्ज कर लिया गया ताकि उसके मुतल्लिक कोई बात ना कर सके। या आजकल इस तरह के वेपन बड़े आम इस्तेमाल हो रहे हैं। दूसरा, वो भी पुराना हरबा है कि जो जर्नलिस्ट बोलता है, जो चैनल बात करता है, उस पर मुल्क दुश्मनी के इल्ज़ामात लगा दे ताकि सोसाइटी का और अवामी रद्द-ए-अमल के खिलाफ इतना हो कि उस प्रेशर के सामने वो उसके साथ ना खड़ा हो सके, तंजीमें उसके साथ खड़ी ना हो सके, सिविल सोसाइटी उसके साथ खड़ी ना हो सके। ये आम वेपन है जिसका जियो न्यूज़ को बहुत अरसा सामने रहा। हामिद मीर साहब आपके सामने बैठे हैं कि इन पर और दीगर वो जर्नलिस्ट जो बात करते थे, सबसे आसान होता था ये मुल्क दुश्मन है, ये मुल्क का गद्दार है, और ये इल्ज़ामात वो लोग फेस करते रहे। और आज फिर 2 माह पहले ARY के इस्लामाबाद के ब्यूरो चीफ खावर घुम्मन, डायरेक्टर न्यूज़ इमाद यूसुफ, उनके मालिक सलमान इकबाल और एक खातून जो एंकर थी, उनके खिलाफ भी बगावत का मुकदमा दर्ज किया गया और आज तक वो बेल पर हैं और इसको भोग रहे हैं। इस तरह के मुकदमात का और इल्ज़ामात का भी मसला ये होता है कि एक आम आदमी जो पाकिस्तान के साथ मोहब्बत करता है, पाकिस्तान का वो शहरी जो पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बात सुनना पसंद नहीं करता, जब उसको पता चलेगा कि किसी जर्नलिस्ट ने पाकिस्तान की दुश्मनी की साजिश कर ली है, तो उसके खिलाफ सोसाइटी में नफरत होगी और उनको उसके खिलाफ कार्रवाई में आसानी मिलेगी। और इसके अलावा तौहीन मजहब आम सा मामला है कि अगर आप किसी को तौहीन मजहब का, ब्लास्फेमी का इल्ज़ाम लगा दें, तो हमारे बहुत से बेगुनाह गैर मुस्लिम भी और मुस्लिम भी मारे गए सिर्फ उस इल्ज़ाम की वजह से। और आजकल नहीं, पहले आप जानते होंगे कि जब जियो को बंद किया गया था तो उसकी एक खातून एंकर के खिलाफ इसी तरह का केस बनाया गया। और 2 माह पहले रावलपिंडी इस्लामाबाद यूनियन ऑफ जर्नलिस्ट के साबिक सदर, जियो न्यूज़ के रिपोर्टर हैं वकार सती, उनके खिलाफ भी ब्लास्फेमी का मुकदमा रावलपिंडी में दर्ज किया गया। सब पूरी सोसाइटी खामोश थी। शुक्रगुजार हूँ हामिद मीर साहब का कि सबसे पहले इन्होंने ट्वीट किया और फिर ज़ाहिर इनके खिलाफ इल्ज़ामात भी लगे। फिर उसके खिलाफ PFUJ ने स्ट्रगल की, जद्दोजहद की, लोअर कोर्ट में गए, फिर हाई कोर्ट में गए। मैं शुक्रगुजार हूँ हाई कोर्ट का कि उन्होंने वो मुकदमा खारिज करने का भी हुक्म दे दिया है। इसके अलावा जो चीज़ सबसे ख़तरनाक है वो ऑर्गेनाइज्ड ट्रोलिंग है, और जिसका सीधा सीधा सबसे पहला सामना हमारी ख़वातीन एंकर्स और जर्नलिस्टों को करना पड़ता है कि जब कोई जर्नलिस्ट बात करता है, खा वो फीमेल जर्नलिस्ट हो या जर्नलिस्ट हो, उसके खिलाफ आप ऑर्गेनाइज ट्रोलिंग शुरू कर दें, आपके उसके वालदा समझाएगी, उसके भाई समझाएंगे, रिश्तेदार समझाएंगे कि भाई पूरा सोशल मीडिया जो है वो आप पर इल्ज़ामात लगा रहा है, आपको क्या ज़रूरत है ये बात करने की। और सबसे बड़ा हथियार जो इस्तेमाल होता है वो मुआशी कत्ल का होता है। आप जानते हैं कि माजी में भी हमारे बहुत से जर्नलिस्टों को बेरोज़गार किया गया, उनके प्रोग्राम बंद किए गए। हामिद मीर साहब थे, तलत हुसैन थे, मतीउल्लाह जान थे, नुसरत जावेद साहब थे, इफ्तिखार अहमद साहब लाहौर से हैं, इम्तियाज़ आलम आमर मीर साहब लाहौर से हैं, और अंबर शमसी वगैरह, और ये सिलसिला आज भी जारी है। मेरी सिर्फ आपसे जो हमें इस वक्त बिगेस्ट थ्रेट है वो ऑर्गेनाइज्ड ट्रोलिंग का है। मेरी आसमा जहांगीर कॉन्फ्रेंस में शिरकत करने वाले ऑर्गेनाइज़र से ये इल्तमास होगी कि आज की इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में ऑर्गेनाइज्ड ट्रोलिंग को सेंसरशिप के खिलाफ सबसे बड़ा हथियार करार दिया जाए ताकि इसका मुकाबला किया जा सके। थैंक यू सो मच।
A big thank you to all the speakers for their comments.